This program is brought to you by Real Estimate. Know the value of your home today with a Real Estimate from realestate.com.au.
Welcome back. There were about 2,400 auctions held on Saturday, returning a clearance rate of about 59% across Australia. Sydney held about 940 auctions with a clearance rate of about 56%. There were also roughly 2,000 private sales in New South Wales. Melbourne held about 900 auctions. The clearance rate was roughly 65%. There were about 1,500 private sales in the state of Victoria. Brisbane held 85 auctions with a clearance rate of 63.5%. There were also about 1,300 private sales. Adelaide held 77 auctions with a clearance rate of almost 77%. There were about 325 private sales. The ACT held 84 auctions, clearance rate of about 70%. There were a further 129 private sales. So for more on this, I'm joined by Angus Moore from REA Group. Angus, good to see you. Just give us an update on how the auction market's tracking as we get closer towards Christmas.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ed. Great to be here. It's been a pretty interesting spring, and it's been quite a busy spring across Melbourne and Sydney. We've been seeing a lot of new homes hitting market. There is quite a lot of choice for buyers around. We're seeing that in auction volumes. They have been very busy weekends throughout the past sort of month and a half. That said, the conditions remain quite good despite those high volumes. Clearance rates, maybe in Sydney a little bit softer than they had been, but still relatively firm and better than what we were seeing last year. And importantly, home prices are growing pretty consistently and solidly in both Sydney and Melbourne, which is a turnaround from what we were seeing last spring when prices were falling in both cities. Outside of those two cities, conditions are a bit quieter. We haven't been seeing as much activity in the smaller capitals. There too, prices remain very firm though. And, while it had looked like they were slowing down a bit as we've got into spring, price growth has, if anything, started to pick back up there, despite the fact that prices have grown incredibly quickly over recent years, and affordability is a lot more strained in those cities than it used to be. We're still seeing pretty strong momentum there.
Yeah, just talk us through how many weeks roughly of the year have we got left before everything shuts down?
Look, we're probably coming up to sort of 3 or 4 weeks left at this point. We tend to see activity run through to kind of mid-December, and then things really quiet off for Christmas and stay very quiet through the end of December and into January. As you'd expect, people are on leave. The auction market's basically shut down over that period. So, we'd expect activity to remain pretty firm. There's still plenty of homes hitting market, plenty of auction campaigns yet to wrap up, but things will certainly quiet off once we get towards mid to late December.
All right, and are you expecting that price growth that you've been seeing to carry that momentum through into the new year when things, pick back up again, probably around Australia Day or after Australia Day long weekend?
At this stage, yes. There's kind of no signs that pace of price growth that we've been seeing this year, that sort of pretty steady, pretty consistent upward trend in prices across the country, is going to change anytime soon. That's been supported by the fact we've seen a few rate cuts. That's been helping boost borrowing capacity. We've also been seeing wage growth. That's helping boost borrowing capacity as well. And that's all supporting consistent, steady, if, perhaps only around average home price growth really across the country now, which is different from what we've been seeing for the past couple of years where, the smaller capitals, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, have been seeing very strong growth. But Sydney and Melbourne have, in recent years, been a bit more sluggish, and that hasn't been as true this year.
You mentioned wage growth. Those figures obviously came out last week with wages at about 3.4%. I mean, what's that going to do to the economy and to the potential for inflation rising over the coming months?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Certainly I think the implications for inflation are something the RBA is keeping a very tight focus on at the moment. The outcome that we got over the year to September was pretty much in line with what the RBA and what markets were kind of broadly expecting. So I think it's probably not going to change where they think inflation's at, which is to say a bit higher than they'd like it, probably dipping outside their target band next year on an underlying basis, which makes them a bit uncomfortable and means we're maybe not expecting to see cash rate cuts as early as we were hoping, or potentially at all at this stage. On that front, maybe not as good as we might hope. But I think on the other front, the fact that we are seeing fairly solid wage growth, 3.5% is not bad, and it's certainly much better than we were seeing through the 2010s. It's also faster than inflation. is going to start supporting household budgets, ease that cost of living constraint, and also boost borrowing capacities.
The other numbers we're going to get this week are the start, really, of the new monthly inflation figure, which is meant to be accurate. How's that going to help economists like you and the Reserve Bank make decisions around the cash rate and where inflation's going?
It's going to be a really interesting, probably 12 to 18 months as we kind of work through what the new CPI means. Australia now joins much of the rest of the world in having a monthly measure of inflation. We've been a bit of an outlier in only having a quarterly measure for many, many years. So that is unequivocally a good thing. It will give us more reads, more data, better sense of where inflation's at. The sort of caveat to that is in the near term, we probably don't have a lot of experience just yet with what that looks like, how that series behaves relative to the quarterly data. And the RBA is certainly of that view and have said as much. So they're going to wait and see how it pans out and how it behaves relative to the quarterly before they start putting too much weight on it. We have had some experience. There has been an experimental partial measure for the last couple years, but this new, more comprehensive measure is still a little bit of a new beast.
Angus Moore from REA Group, thanks for coming on the show.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ed.